Hey, hello everybody, welcome back to Momo vs. MTG. Today, we'll be taking a look at another one of my personal commander deck techs on CHEAP Overlord. So for 3 generic mana and Rakdos, you get a legendary creature, Kobold Warrior. Other kobolds you control get +2/+2, and whenever you cast a kobold spell, you may pay 2. If you do, create a 4/4 dragon creature token with flying. Whenever you cast a dragon spell, create a 0/1 red kobold creature token named Kobolds of CHEAP. So as you could probably guess from reading the commander, it is Kobolds and Dragons Tribal. It's a neat little deck. This is probably, around casual. This is pretty solid casual. There is, I think, an infinite in the deck, but it plays out in a more casual, mid-range, higher up, you know, end of the spectrum here. So this guy came out in Dominaria United, Commander, and I took a kin to him because I thought casting funny little kobold spells is really neat to do. Because we have no true dragons in the deck. We're trying to mainly get value off this first ability here, where we just create dragon tokens instead of casting dragons for the 0/1 red kobolds. But if we could do both, that is ideal, which this deck can definitely do. So without further ado, let's jump right in, starting with the ramp. We are in Rakdos colors, so we have the generic signets, Arcane, the Talismans, like Farewell Stone, Rakdos signets, just the cheaper ramp cards. Nothing too of note. Of course, Solemn here is a creature, which matters later on. Wayfarer's Bauble and the Soul Ring. The one I want to point out is the Dragon's Horde. So whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, put a gold counter on Dragon's Horde. You can remove a gold counter from Dragon's Horde, draw a card, or just a mana rock. So dual purpose, 3 mana rock, a little more expensive, but I love the dual purpose modes on here. It can help us out later on if we're just looking for card draw. Because we should be emptying our hand out pretty quick due to the cheap creatures we have in the deck. And the one of the more expensive cards, which we don't need to really ramp up to too hard, is our commander at 5. And then after that, the kobolds are pretty cheap. So speaking of them, let's jump into the tribe. We have a bunch of kobolds here, especially the 0-drop ones are the most valuable, which we'll go into. But they are just 0/1s. With our commander, they'll be buffed up to 2/3s, kind of neat. But yeah, we just want to fill our deck with as many cheap kobolds as possible in order to cast or have mana left over to pay 2 to activate our commander's ability to create dragons. But alongside of that, we are running some changeling type effects. Adapted Automaton's not a true changeling, but it could be a kobold or dragon and can buff our team if we have a bunch of dragons or kobolds, which is neat. Bloodline Pretender, great card, has the changeling tag. So these creatures will trigger both triggered abilities of our commander. So first we can pay 2 to create a kobold because they are technically a kobold spell. And then later on, the next trigger, we get a 0/1 kobold on top of it because it thinks it's also a dragon. So changelings are exceedingly well in this deck. They work pretty dang good, and especially the cheaper ones as well, because that's a lot of value. Well, 1 mana, 2 if you have to pay into CHEAP Overlord for 2 mana. 3 altogether, you're getting a 1/1 blocker, creating a 0/1 that's going to get buffed, and creating a 4/4 dragon with flying. So we're running 3. There are 4 kobolds with the 0 mana tag. Namely, of course, Rograk, son of Rog. And it has all this fancy text on it. But they become super important later on. We really don't care too much for the extra abilities. We even have the other Rosnak, heir of Rog, so the other kobold pair, funny enough. Yeah, so they're mainly there for the flavor of creating the dragon tokens, which is pretty cool. Some have added effects on them, of course, which will either buff them or give an extra lord effect. Some nice changelings I'll point out too is like Venomous Changeling, 1/3 with Death Touch, nice to have around. Tauren Maulers are like a pretty high value target for most opponents, so it's nice to be able to slam this down, draw some attention away from your own commander. But yeah, changeling creature, trigger both parts of our commander. Nice utility here is Grave Shifter, a little more expensive, but you have a little bit of recursion in the changeling tribe. So they all do a little bit here and there to help the game plan along. But what we're really trying to get into is something along the lines of a Dragon Tempest per se. Because whenever a creature with flying enters the battlefield under your control, it gains haste on the turn. Whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, it deals X damage to any target where X is the number of dragons you control. So the fun part about Dragon Tempest and Changelings are, these of course are dragons, so they're not going to get haste if they don't have flying. However, they'll trigger Dragon Tempest and be able to hit our opponents and their creatures, their permanents, for a lot of damage. So that is the neat part about having all these cheap creatures be able to pay into Roghar's CHEAP Overlord's ability. And then how the deck goes into the infinite mana loop it has is with Cloudstone Curio. So this card reads, for 3 mana, whenever a non-artifact permanent comes into play under your control, you may return another permanent you control that shares a permanent type with it to its owner's hand. So you can probably guess where this is going with all these 0-drop kobolds. These 4 in particular. You have infinite ETBs, infinite bouncing a creature back to your hand triggers, potentially, with the Cloudstone Curio out. And if we had mana to back it up with our commander, we'd have infinite dragon creation. And with a Dragon Tempest out, it would be a game changer. You usually win the game on the spot with that if you have all the cards needed for the combo to go off. So it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 here for the true 5-card combo to go infinite with colorless mana and damage. Just for mana, it's a 4-card combo. If you had Cloudstone, Mana Echoes, and 2 Kobolds, and your commander out, is Mana Echo reads, which turns the combo into the true infinite for 4 mana, 2 of it being red. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you may add an amount of colors equal to the number of creatures you control that share the creature type with it. So if we are creating dragons and kobolds, casting kobold spells, we're going to be generating a ton of mana, because whether we have a lot of dragon tokens entering or kobolds entering, we're going to have a ton of colorless mana to work with. So being able to afford Roghar's CHEAP Overlord's ability, and also being able to get more triggers of it with Cloudstone. So that is the neat infinite combo in the deck. But if you can't pull that off, it's not usually game breaking enough to not have you have a chance of winning the game. Because the other game plan still holds true, just creating a whole bunch of dragons and kobolds and going wide. So now I'll just dive into some neat tech cards in the deck. We have Umbilicus for 4 mana, beginning each player's upkeep. That player may pay 2 life. If they don't, they return a permanent they control to its owner hand. So it's either a nice, simple drain effect on your opponents, but you abuse this ability by, you want your kobolds back in your hand to recast, because CHEAP Overload's ability is a cast ability. So getting them back into your hand to be able to play again is what you really want to be doing. And this ensures that you have something to do on each of your turns, of course. And here we have some protection spells, because their commander's pretty important to the overall game plan. Champion Helm's nice because it costs 1 to equip and gives it hexproof and buffs it. And Lightning Greaves, of course, is nice. And Maskwood Nexus is probably, a slam dunk in the deck, of course, because creatures you control are every creature type. Same is true for creature spells you control and cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. So this allows us to turn all our kobolds also into dragons, giving us an additional 0/1 red kobold on the cast. So really neat, and of course works great with Mana Echoes. So everything flows together pretty nice in the deck. I have a lot of fun playing this deck, and let's just take a look at just the other stuff that supports it. So we have some artifact hate with Bedevil, also creature planeswalker, but Vandal Blast, of course, gets rid of all of them. Feed the Swarm is, your only option. Rakdos pretty much for enchantment removal. There's others, but this is the best one, right? 3 board wipes I feel like is enough, and they are very, besides Blasphemous Act, one-sided, which is really good for the deck. Blasphemous Act, of course, gets rid of basically everything. Kindred Dominance allows you to destroy creatures that aren't the type that you want. So with one-sided board wipes, of course, are very powerful to have in a commander format, so it's nice to add. And Crux of Fate's a nice tech because if we have a whole bunch of dragons, we can kill all the non-dragons, or if we have a bunch of non-dragons and our opponent's playing Dragon Tribal, let's get rid of them. So dual purpose board wipe here is pretty sick to see. And other nice cards, Chaos Warp, staple, gets rid of any permanent, could potentially turn into a worse one, but let's not talk about that. Terminate, Animalca Reaper, it's a freebie. Protection your creature, have it return to the battlefield, flips into a land if you need it for the land side. Hurl Through Hell is a fun tech, and this is a deck where I'm going to add the more fun cards for sure. You have to exile a creature, opponent's biggest threat, and then your next turn you can cast it. So nice options to have here. And then we have some decent amount of recursion here with Phyrexian Reclamation, always a great one. Raise the Draugr is pretty cool because you return 2 creature cards that share a creature type to your hand, which again to the hand is more ideal with all these effects because you want to be casting them again, especially if there's 0 mana. It's just basically a freebie. Agony Awakening is pretty cool because it is also a freebie. Could flip it to the land. And the kind of a stretch deck I went for is Hakon Stormglad Scourge for 3 mana, 2 of it being black. It is a zombie knight, and you can play Hakon Storm Scourge from your graveyard, but not from anywhere else. And as long as Hakon's on the battlefield, you may play knight cards from your graveyard. So you might be saying, well, we don't have any knights, but of course, you saw our maskwood nexus. So if we can have this in play, we now have access to all the kobolds that may have been put into our graveyard, and we can refill our board pretty quick just by casting all these because they're so cheap. And then even if we don't have Maskwood Nexus out, we at least have some changeling creatures here that we can also cast from the graveyard. So either way, worst case Maskwood Nexus is removed, we still have outs to use it. So I thought it was a neat tech to add into the deck. And in Whipper Erebos is great, right? Gives creatures lifelink, and you can return something for a turn. Lifelink on our swinging dragons will be nice to keep us alive, because that's a hard commodity to find in Rakdos sometimes. Really fun card that was recently added, Sarkhan the Mad for 5 mana to be in Rakdos. I didn't even know there was a Rakdos Sarkhan Planeswalker. But for 0, reveal the top card of your library and put it into your hand. Sarkhan the Mad deals damage to himself equal to that card's converted mana value. So it's kind of like a Bob the Dark Confident ability, but instead of you taking damage, the Planeswalker takes the damage. So that's funny. Then for -2, target creature controller sacrifices it. Then that player puts a 5/5 dragon creature token when flying to the battlefield. So in a pinch can be really bad removal, which I think is funny, giving them a 5/5 dragon to then immediately kill him because he has 5. He'll be left with 5 loyalty. Or you even use it on yourself, turn one of your kobolds into a 5/5 dragon. Like, I guess there's utility around it, which is funny. But then the -4 is kind of the Dragon Tempest effect, where each dragon creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target player. So hopefully, if you have a full loaded board, all you have to do is drop this guy later on, and hopefully take the game that way, before moving even into combat. And then to help our game plan flow along, I've added some tutors to the deck. Doesn't make it like insanely broken, but it's nice to have, I think, in this type of deck. So Inventor's Fair is always sweet. Can search for an artifact, namely if you have the requirements behind it. Maskwood Nexus is generally what we want to be grabbing. Also the Entomb effects are pretty sick. So we can put Hakon straight into the graveyard and generate value that way. Scheming Symmetry is fun. If you're in the right pod for it, instead of because someone could just tutor for the win con, right? Straight to their hand and then win next turn. But if you're in the right pod with lower power, is a fun one to make a deal with an opponent. Be like, hey, I'll let you tutor for something. Don't hit me. Whatever deal you strike up. Diabolical Intent. I like the tutors that have some costs behind it. So you have to sacrifice a creature, then look for a card. And then just one of the more expensive tutors for 4 mana. And again, like you can substitute the tutors you want, but I feel like this fits pretty nice with the theme of the deck. And then one of the last things I want to look at is the draw options we have here. So some cheap ones, Faithless Looting, and of course we can do this again, so a lot of value there. And we want some stuff in the graveyard too, like it's not bad for us. Dark Confidant for 2 mana, of course, which I referenced before. Beginning your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library, put the card in your hand, you lose life equal to its converted mana cost. So we have a lot of cheap creatures. We have some more expensive stuff, don't get me wrong. But a lot of kobolds are either 0 or cheaper. 2.6 curve ain't too bad. So that'd be the average damage being dealt to us each turn. So I'd say it's worth it. Excuse me. Deadly Dispute, always nice. Drawing cards, creating treasures. Black Market Connections is pretty dang good in this deck because we take advantage of all the modes. Treasure, can draw a card. Also can create a 3/2 color shapeshifter in a pinch because they will get buffed by your commander being 5/4s. So pretty sweet. Jessica's Will, Commander Staple, of course. And a neat one here. So sacrifice a Scarecrow, draw a card. And this is repeatable ability here, no tapping. If we have changelings out or the maskwood nexus, of course, we can churn through a ton of cards. And the nice added bonus here is for 4 mana, return target artifact creature card from your graveyard to play. So some reanimation for like a solemn or something nice. So it's cool having options and pretty cheap creature on top of it all for a lot of options you can have with it. Species Specialist is great. So you choose dragons or kobolds, and when usually kobolds, when that creature chosen type dies, draw a card. So sweet value there. Vanquisher Banner is kind of cool because you can buff your team, but then also the same turn, right? Let's say you have a Vanquisher Banner, 5 mana, you drop it, you're out of mana, but those 0-drop kobolds kind of cycle for free because they draw cards. And lastly, a Bowls of Citadel. Nice. I don't run the Sensei top for another infinite. You could, but I just like a valuable Citadel. See where you can go with it. See what kind of run you can have. So for 6 mana, of course, a lot of the spells again are cheap. So hopefully we're not paying a ton of life into this to make our run, with a nice end game effect here. So yeah, this is the general overview of Kobold's Tribal. I'd like to know your thoughts on the deck, see what you think of it, yeah, any comments about it, or if you have something else in mind that you'd like to see from me, please let me know, or if you have a deck tech that you want me to take a look at one of yours, you can comment it down below as well. But without further ado, deck tech will be in the description, as well as my other decks and playlists. Yeah, thank you for hanging out with Momo versus MTG. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.